Hello, everyone. So there's a lot I would like to cover today, so let's jump right into it. John Bolton is being appointed by Trump to the position of National Security Advisor. I believe he's due to take that position in early April, in a few days. Um, so Trump ran on a more or less anti-war message. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of strong caveats to that. I mean, he did say on Fox News on the campaign trail that he wanted to bomb the families of ISIS and that he was pro-torture, all that. But the point was to invest more in the homeland than overseas, not get involved in the regime change wars, and you know, on some level, it seems like we're going to be evacuating troops from Syria sooner, so that's kind of a plus in that category. However, we are not going to, we're actually cutting off aid to Syria, so I don't agree with that. I mean, we're killing civilians there. We have been. And we've just devastated that country really needlessly because it's not a threat to our security. Not really. Um, and we've just, we've decimated this country, and not just us, but we should be helping them out. I believe. I understand the argument that we have to be funding things more at home than overseas. That's true, but I don't think we should cut off aid like Trump is doing. And also, I would add, like, we're evacuating troops now. But, Obama left Iraq once and then went back. So I'm not necessarily, I'm not keeping my hopes up per se. I'm just going to wait and see what happens. I mean, it could be very much so that we'll just end up back in Syria again for whatever reason. Um, but the point is, Trump lambasted the Iraq War and said it was one of the worst mistakes in our history. And then he picks this guy, John Bolton, one of the key figures in pushing that war on the American public, to be head of national security. Um, in the White House, the main advisor on national security to him. Um, he's pushed for and continues to push for regime change in Iran, and North Korea. He actually wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, recently this year, I believe, and it makes the case that we should preemptively attack North Korea. So, that's as hawkish as it gets. Um, and it's a total flip on the campaign rhetoric. So, I almost, I feel like the people that would have voted for a more left candidate, and then they say like, oh, Hillary Clinton was such a big war hawk, so I'm voting against war in my vote for Trump. They were fooled, and I would say, yeah, you should have realized because of a lot of the things that Trump said, but he said conflicting things. Um, but it's just it's one of those things where yeah, I mean, Trump really did kind of lie because he said one thing and now he's going completely against it. So anyways, in the case of Iran, Bolton wants to exit the Iran deal, which is a horrible mistake. Okay, I've probably talked about this before in other videos, but I'll just briefly say, if you want Iran to not have a nuclear weapon, the best way is to do it through diplomacy, do it through the nuclear deal. Why? Because when you have that agreement in writing, you have the diplomacy between you and Iran. They're more accountable to you and the UN, because they're allowed to go in there and check unannounced, and without the deal, Iran is just more likely to do whatever they want. I mean, people would probably argue, yeah, they'll do whatever they want anyways. But the point is, the Iran deal. If you're trying to hold up that deal, and promote that as a good thing, that's just more likely to get the outcome you want. Um, so it just makes total sense. It's like, yeah, obviously, if you follow your side of the deal, the U.S., which we haven't, um, but theoretically, yeah, if we were trying to um, sustain the deal, it would just be more likely that they don't have nukes because we have the resources allowed to us to go in there and inspect Iran and their nuclear sites and make sure that it's not for weapons and it's for their power grid like it's allowed by law. He often makes the case that Iran is the greatest funder of terrorism globally, which is complete nonsense. And I'm going to actually go to Huffington Post to prove this point. This is written by Adam Weinstein, who is a policy associate at National Iranian American Council, also a veteran of Afghanistan. And he writes, Saudi Arabia, not Iran, is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world today, and Wahhabism remains the source of most radical Islamic extremism. For years, Iran has borne an unenviable title of world's biggest state sponsor of terrorism. However, out of the 61 groups that are designated as terrorist organizations by the U.S. State Department, the overwhelming majority are Wahhabi-inspired and Saudi-funded groups, with a focus on the West and Iran as their primary enemy. Only two are Shia, Hezbollah, and Kataib Hezbollah, I believe, and only 4 have ever claimed to receive support from Iran. Nearly all of the Sunni militant groups listed receive significant support from either the Saudi government or Saudi citizens. It should be no surprise that we don't hear how Saudi Arabia funds terrorism like it's nobody's business because we're their ally. Trump has a $1 billion weapons deal with them. They paid like $200-something thousand to stay at Trump's hotel when they came here. So this is just shadiness, corruption 101. I mean, and of course it's not just Trump. It's been the relationship it's been that way for a while between past presidents. But again, I would say this is kind of an example of Trump not draining the swamp, not caring about corruption and the same old thing. I mean, look, if Hillary Clinton was president and being this buddy with the Saudis, I guarantee you'd hear about it all day on Fox News, and you would hear so much criticism. But when Trump does it, because he's such a buffoon, he like looks kind of professional when he's like being diplomatic. So it's like, oh, it's so great. But no, this is the same establishment nonsense that people hate, and it's going to ultimately turn away people, and for good reason, because it's not right that we're allies with people that have a backwards ideology. Saudi Arabia, you can get killed just for being gay. You can be killed for doing sorcery, whatever that would even mean. And going back to North Korea, I mean, what it comes down to is Kim Jong-un, the nukes and weapons that he has are a deterrent. These things, he's not going to do a first strike because it's not in his best interest. He understands that any kind of first strike against South Korea, Japan, or whatever, it's the end for his regime. Essentially, it's going to be game, set, and match because look, they're a rinky-dink country, and compared to us and our allies, like they're going to be wiped off the map. So these weapons that he has are a deterrent, and I understand like he's a crazy guy. There's a lot of crazy stories that come out of North Korea, but I don't subscribe to the idea that he's dumb, Kim Jong Un. I think he is a smart guy and he knows what he's doing here, strategically speaking. So this idea that you're going to preemptively strike North Korea is just so misguided, and it's fear mongering to the extreme. Um, then we go to Larry Kudlow being appointed to the head of Trump's Economic Advisory Board. Um, Larry Kudlow was consistently wrong about the Great Recession. And in fairness, a lot of people didn't see it coming at first, but in the year 2008, which was 10 years ago already, um, you know, once we got towards the end of 2008, it started to become more clear, and at least some people did see that signs were there and things are going to go downhill until around, I guess, like November, maybe even October, November, December. Like it was pretty much clear, yeah, we're going to have a Great Recession. But he defended it so adamantly. Like, he even wrote a piece in the National Review that came out a day before the crash and defended George Bush, saying that, oh, the economy's booming, everything's going great, all the naysayers are wrong. The guy is a TV personality, Larry Kudlow. He has no training in economics. And this is a broader problem, I think, with the Trump administration. It's meant to be a way of preventing real change from happening by appointing people who have no idea what they're doing. It's really an anti-government view, like I've talked about before, going back to Ronald Reagan. A lot of dumb conservatives in the American populace, I feel like they fall for this veneer certain people like Trump put out, where it's like, oh, I'm such a seasoned person and I know my way around with and I know so many people. I know the best people for the job. And so it's basically like, oh, I trust Trump's opinion because of his upbringing and his career and success, if you want to call it that. But really, I mean, Trump just picks these people that have no place in government at all. Larry Kudlow doesn't. He has no formal training in economics. He picked Ben Carson to head the housing and urban development. He's a neurosurgeon. Like, these things just don't add up, and that's just two examples. There's so many other things I could say. A similar people with no experience that he's put in power. So it's ridiculous. And just because I want to emphasize that it's not just like, yeah, okay, he was wrong about the Great Recession. There's a piece in the Washington Post. It kind of gives you a timeline of things Larry Kudlow has said. So let me just pull that up real quick. So, excuse me, sorry. In 1993, Kudlow proclaimed in a speech, "There is no question that President Clinton's across-the-board tax increases on labor, capital, and energy will throw a wet blanket over the recovery and depress the economy's long-run potential." And the economy goes into an 8-year expansion and adds 21 million jobs. We had a surplus under Bill Clinton. 2001, Kudlow writes in National Review about the George W. Bush tax cuts. Faster economic growth and more profitable productivity returns will generate higher tax revenues at the new lower tax rate levels. Future budget surpluses will rise, not fall. Tax revenue falls, and the budget goes from surplus into deep deficits. 2002, Kudlow, arguing for the war in Iraq, writes in National Review, "The shock therapy of decisive war will elevate the stock market by a couple thousand points. The market falls, and the Dow Jones doesn't go get that couple thousand point elevation for years. 2009 says in an interview, President Obama is waging war on investors. He's waging war against businesses. In a piece in Washington Times, he warns that inflation could ratchet higher. The stock market and corporate profits climb to records, while inflation remains historically low. Like, even just on that last point there, I want to touch on real quick. Um, Everyone was all like worried, like, oh, Obama is like, they made him out to be like a socialist. Like, what a joke that is. But he's like, oh, he's against business and he's raising taxes like crazy. Oh my God. Um, well, first of all, he actually made 90% of the Bush tax cuts permanent, and that was largely a good thing. There were a lot of tax cuts for the middle class that were in that, but the stock market like practically doubled under Obama, and you had corporate profits, reaching record levels, like it says here. So this idea that Obama was against businesses is ridiculous. I mean, I guess people will make the argument like small businesses as opposed to like the corporations. I guess so, but I've not heard any real argument based in policy on that. Like, I hear a lot of people gripe about Obama and small businesses, but give me a real example here, because I've not seen it, and I don't know. I go based on policy. I'm not going based on like your gut feeling. Like, oh, I just think that the government hates business. Um. Okay. So one little positive, if you want to call it that, about Larry Kudlow, he was previously not in favor of tariffs, but now that Trump did them, he said that he agrees. Trump did tariffs on steel and aluminum. In my opinion, with that is, I agree with tariffs. I think that we should be incentivizing businesses to uh, to to not outsource their jobs and hire American. The problem comes in, and what the other side of the argument would say is, basically the corporations, they're just gonna pay the tariffs anyways and raise their prices, so the consumer gets hurt in the end. And I think that's a solid point. I just feel like Trump has to do more. Like you like most things, being president, like you have to have strong leadership throughout and have a real plan to reinvigorate steel and manufacturing in this country. It's not just gonna really happen overnight. It's not even like one little policy decision can't possibly spark that kind of uh, boom in industry like that. It takes a lot more hard work and time to do these things. So I think there's got to be more ways to incentivize businesses and corporations to do so. It's a good step in the right direction, but I think it doesn't go far enough. You have to have a real plan to reinvigorate corporations and manufacturing here. Um, so I don't usually talk about these kind of stories where I'm like talking about other progressive media outlets, but I think it's going to illustrate a broader point that I want to make. So Cliff Schecter, he was a political consultant for Bill Clinton back in the day. He was on the Majority Report with Sam Seder, a show I frequently watch, and Sam Seder called him out for having David Frum, a neocon and Bush speechwriter, former Bush speechwriter, on his program. And basically, the reason that Frum was on the program was Frum is a never Trumper, and he's, really harping away on Russiagate, and Cliff Schecter happens to pretty much agree with that. He even says, when Sam Seder presses him, Cliff says, like, oh yeah, Putin pretty much attacked the country. These things, it's just not it's not based in any real claims here. I mean, I don't know what you want to point to because you got to point to something here. You can't just throw accusations like that out there without actually providing evidence. I mean, the Christmas after the election, they had a CIA report come out, which basically is like, yeah, we're asserting that Putin was behind the DNC hacks, meaning, yeah, they meddled in the election. And if you want proof of that, well, we're not going to provide real proof. It's just these are our findings, basically. Sounds a lot like kind of the lead up to Iraq, if you want to ask me, because it's not based in any real evidence. Again, there's things that come out now. I mean, look, they say Guccifer 2.0, the guy who supposedly hacked the DNC, was a Russian operative. I mean, that's interesting. You gotta look deeper into that, I suppose. Again, the point I would make is just like I don't think it had a very big outcome on the election. Um, and even if you want to say that it did, I to say this was an attack on the country, I think is very very hyperbolous. It's the election came down to the voters. Okay, this assumption again. I've made this point so many times, but this assumption that Russians had so much sway over the voters that it really like changed the result of the election. That's what we're ultimately talking about, and the DNC emails tarnished Hillary Clinton so much that she lost. Well, first of all, those were her own words. Okay, so yeah, okay, they were hacked, and I guess they were private. We shouldn't have seen them. Well, they were her own words, and she never chose to address what was said in them. She basically just talked about, oh, they came from Russia. So it's a total BS claim, and it doesn't really add up to much of anything. And again, like if you want to connect a line from Trump to Putin, like be my guest. I don't know how you're going to do that because there's just no real evidence of this. David Frum, this guy, he's the kind of someone who'll dance around someone like John Bolton being a bad guy, but not actually say it. It's like he makes these things open for debate. Frum writes in a article that he wrote in The Atlantic, the task of making sense of this chaos now falls to Bolton, a man of strong and certain opinions, but not one adept at winning friends, convincing doubters, soothing opponents, cajoling foreign leaders, or governing bureaucracy. So think about that framing. It's suddenly now like, Bolton, his main problem is that he's not really going to be effective. He's not going to be able to govern bureaucracy. It's not that his policies are too extreme. That's what's implied. It's often like in these cases what's not said. The lack of an ability to call out someone like Bolton like that and to just be kind of like beating around the bush with this kind of rhetoric, I think it's dangerous, and ultimately it rehabilitates these people's image, and it makes it look like, oh, they're not that extreme. They are extreme, and they need to be called out as such. And this was something that was in the same article. This is a quote from John Bolton that I wanted to touch on. So Bolton says, "Let us consider a few of the prevailing myths about the Iraq War. 1. Iraq is worse off now than under Saddam. This charge could only come from people with a propensity to admire totalitarianism. And in any event, the issue was never about making life better for Iraqis, but about ensuring a safer world for America and its allies." So, first of all, how condescending is that last part? We're not trying to make life better for Iraqis when we invaded you and occupied your country illegally, even though you didn't attack us. We're just trying to uh, ensure a safer world for America and its allies. And oh yeah, by the way, jack your oil. And then the first part about totalitarianism, total straw man. Okay, just think of Syria. It's the same kind of dynamic because look, you just because you don't like Saddam, um, and you admit he's a bad guy, something needs to be done. It doesn't mean you invade the country, occupy it, and stay there for over a decade. You know, like you have to think in a way that's going to minimize violence and actually, I mean, when we invaded Iraq, we created more terrorism. That's just objectively true. So it was a total disaster. It was not the way to go about it. So like with Syria, my view is we shouldn't be involved militarily. Not really. I mean, to the extent that we would be, it would have to be very, very targeted and very precise. Not like, you know, just wanton drone strikes that like we do where we kill civilians. Um, so not involved militarily, but you can advocate for a regime change. You know, in the sense that like you want diplomatically to reach that goal. You're not going to do regime change by the end of a gun, but do it through diplomacy. Get people on your side. And look, I think this is somewhat of a controversial point to make, but I'll make it anyways. Um, I'm not necessarily opposed to meddling in other elections and other businesses. I mean, it is almost, I mean, other countries' businesses. I mean, um, like, it is, I guess, kind of a form of intervention, but it's not, for us to make, you know, propaganda to a degree, to make political media, writing, videos, whatever it is, that will influence other people of our stated goals and what we would like to see happen, like in Syria. I don't necessarily view that as a bad thing. I kind of just view it as us um, saying what we believe, um, calling things for what they are. I mean, Assad is not a good guy. He's not a good leader. He's a dictator. So, you know, the other thing you could do is just stay silent. But I think that's a little bit morally reprehensible because the guy is not good and he's been really reckless, actually, and pretty much risked his entire country's population's lives. So I think the U.S. non-violently trying to intervene to influence the outcome of something in a country, I don't necessarily view that as a bad thing. Um, so one other quick thing, a few other things that I want to wrap it up with. So you need to be really careful, I think. People on the left need to be careful about forming these kind of alliances, especially with right wingers. Excuse me. And it's like, yeah, they're like never Trumpers. Okay. Um, the Never Trump movement, in my opinion, what it's really based around is pretty much they don't disagree that much with Trump's horrible policies. What they disagree with is the kind of brash persona that he has that kind of puts people off with his like rude comments, and they don't like that he's supposedly buddy with Russia. But you know, I've talked about so many times, like I don't think that's substantiated by anything. He's acted against Russia, um, and you know, again, like the idea that like he would want to be a little bit more friends with Russia to you know avoid more tension. I don't think that's a bad thing. There's a line that you cross. Like look, I don't think you have to risk Um, if you want to be diplomatic with Russia, you can still be honest about how you view certain things, and you can still say Putin is not a good guy. There's a real problem with journalists dying in Russia, but I think at the end of the day, trying to reach some common ground is not a bad thing. And these never Trumpers, what they do is they just say like anything even remotely that looks like Trump is on Russia's side. It He's a puppet, and we have to. Trump should be doing the opposite of what he's doing, meaning he has to be more hawkish on Russia, and so this is why the never Trumpers. A lot of times, I feel like they're just establishment shills, and they're out of touch. Honestly, that they're people that, like I say, want the same far right policies, but just want kind of a better, more appealing face on it. Um, and this going back to like making the kind of alliances uh, and being careful about that. Jimmy Dore, who's kind of a prominent voice on the left, he proposed like this pact with Mike Cernovich, who's just a right wing smear merchant liar, making a pact with him because he's supposedly anti-war. And things like this, they give a bad name to the left. I'm sorry, but um, you have to ask yourself, like with Cliff Schecter and David Frum, and Sam Cedar actually made this point, so I won't take credit for it. But like, what does having these right wingers, these never Trumpers, what does having them on your side, like elevating their voice, what does that do for you? It doesn't do much of anything. It's like, oh yeah, there's like some insight from the conservative side that kind of agrees with what I think. Um, whatever, fine. They have some things that you agree with. I think you can say that's a good job, but at the end of the day, you have to say the macro picture. The macro picture is that these people are not good, and they espouse things that are oftentimes false and beliefs that are kind of reprehensible. Um, it's like just because somebody says something that you kind of agree with that you think is good doesn't erase all their other actions. So I just don't see the value in having someone like David Frum on your side, who's was part of the Bush administration, and I'm not for rehabilitating these people's image. So the last thing that I'll talk about is Sinclair Media is getting a lot of press attention. CNN and establishment types, they're complaining that they suppose the Sinclair talks about fake news and media bias, and I guess they own like 172 TV stations in across the country. I don't know a ton of specifics about Sinclair. What I've read is that they're not a good organization. It's basically just right-wing propaganda. I mean, like on the level of Fox News, pretty much. So they have their own agenda. That's certainly true. But is the media, the establishment media, biased? Do they not have their priorities straight? Of course. They talk endlessly about Russia, even though there's no evidence for these things. You could point to so many cases of corruption and collusion, real collusion between Trump and Saudi Arabia, Israel, and it's never talked about in the media. But Russia is always the go-to. Stormy Daniels is on everyone's mind apparently, and it's just like so much, like weeks and weeks on end we're hearing about Stormy Daniels. Why? Bernie Sanders recently just had a town hall about income inequality. It got over 1 million views. No mainstream coverage of that. So I think this is something where there is kind of a middle ground here. Okay, like the right wing points to the downfalls of establishment media, and I think they're criticisms are right, but it's for their own agenda. The right wing, it's not like everything that they're reporting on is like completely true and there's no bias there. Like obviously Fox News is biased. Infowars, these right wing outlets are biased. Left wing outlets, to the extent that they're biased, maybe they like left leaning politicians, but they point to real facts and data. So it's I don't think it's comparable. Um, and yes, just the establishment media, they're not calling out the things that are important to to the American people. They aren't doing the job that they're supposed to be doing, which is, basically speaking truth to power.